give a warm welcome to the hosts of the Bride of Alternate Ending.
Hello, ghouls and goblins, and welcome back to Bride of Alternate Ending. I am one of your hosts, Brennan Klein, accompanied, as always, by Tim Brayton. How are you doing today, Tim?
I am good. I feel like for parallelism, I should say that I'm the other one of your hosts, and I'm glad to be here.
See, the thing that I like is that infamously, the way I start a podcast is by just jumping into the water with an inflatable tube that I'm actively pumping up as I'm jumping and hoping that I can float. And you kind of swim in with a pin and try to poke as many holes in it as possible. And I appreciate that. I appreciate that about our dynamic.
And to be clear, I do that to Rob as well.
Oh yeah.
But because you're on a little vinyl tube that you're inflating, and Rob has like a steel rowboat, it's much harder for the pins to bother him.
No, that's true. I wish I was. I don't know. For some reason, I mean, part of the structure of Bride of Alternate Ending is that we don't really have a structure. But that also means I've never really established a show script, because Rob has like a monologue that he has memorized. Like he is strutting and fretting his hour upon the stage, and I'm just kind of fretting.
Right, because you've sort of been our Rob for a little bit now.
Yeah.
Or for I guess an episode, but it was much appreciated.
Yeah, no problem. Look, I'm happy to do it. I still don't. It's more like for him it's like a steel dock, and for me it's kind of one of those like wooden docks that you can park your boat at, so it can still get a little wetter than it needs to, but I am trying my best.
Sure.
Anyway, this is the second episode of Horror Comedies Month, a topic requested by our Patreon member, Jack, who's at the Oscar level. So thank you to Jack.
Thank you, Jack.
This is one of the ones that did not get voted by the people by the Patreon community that we submitted our poll to. And I was upset by this, so we decided to rectify it by watching it the fuck anyway. This is 1988's Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. So, we discussed this last time, but neither of us have any experience with Elvira, right?
I mean, I grew up in the 80s, so like there was a level of just she was in the world and you knew that. And I mean, I was obviously too young. I think when this movie came out I was 6. So not certainly seeing Elvira, not, being exposed to that kind of level of body humor, and if I had, I wouldn't have necessarily known what I was hearing. But I knew who she was. She would, her face, would drift across chat shows and such. But no, I had never had a first-hand experience with an Elvira property prior to this movie.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, same here. I mean, she just lives in that cultural osmosis. So even at the time that I was growing up, Elvira was kind of well and truly off the air, but she was a presence that I was vaguely aware of, partially through the Simpsons character Boobarella and various kind of cultural properties that are parodying her through the years. But yeah, so for those who aren't in the know, Elvira was kind of the horror hostess of a late-night horror show on the Los Angeles station KHJ-TV. She had a show called Elvira's Movie Macabre from 81 through 86. And then a variety of revivals and new versions of that throughout the years. But yeah, she's a kind of gothic pin-up scream queen character created by Cassandra Peterson, who's a really interesting person. She started out... Yeah. She was a Vegas showgirl. She was in the Groundlings. She was just rolling around everywhere until she just found this thing that was going to be her life.
Right. And no, reading about Peterson, who just had a memoir come out last year, it sounds like her just own personal life would be at least as interesting as any film that she has starred in could have been. But no, and just for those of you who don't quite know what the phrase horror host is in reference to, there was a glory years of the 70s and 80s when local stations would run horror movies but rather than just show the movie, they would have the commercial bumpers would basically be hosted by some local talent. Often, sort of canonically, it was a member of the weather team, so it would be like the weatherman would dress up as a zombie or whatnot, and offer sort of intermittent commentary on the film, very typically done in a kind of campy, sarcastic way. And my understanding is that the first person to ever do that was Mela Nurmi, who played a character called Vampira, who may be known to some of you as the female ghoul in Plan 9 from Outer Space. And apparently, Elvira started as an attempt to get Vampira herself back on the air, but for whatever reason, Nurmi decided that that wasn't going to work out for her, so they basically grabbed Cassandra Peterson and was like, do you want to play this as close as we can get without triggering a lawsuit version of Vampira? And Peterson said yes, and then certainly took that character in her own, I think inimitable is very much the word, direction.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I hadn't really gotten a sense of the thing that Elvira does before this movie. Obviously, I knew she was well known for having just truly enormous, kind of like Dolly Parton-esque breasts.
Yes.
And that was obviously a huge part of her character. Like literally, her follow-up film to this, which came out like 25 years after or something. It's called Elvira's.
Aren't you proud of me for not even picking up when you said huge part?
I mean, I said that on purpose, so.
Okay.
It was the joke in and of itself.
Okay, I wasn't sure that you had done that.
Oh no. Oh, I did.
Okay.
No, but like her follow-up film was called Elvira's Haunted Hills.
Yes. Which is an extremely good name.
It's so good. But that is the thing that I knew about her, but the way to which the character comes to life is very interesting, and let's talk about it. In this movie is the most bizarre mishmash of approaches.
It is, and I will spoil my opinion by saying that the thing that it is when it starts, I was vibing with so hard, and I was like, I was getting closer to a 4-star review than I was comfortable with, to be perfectly honest, for the first part. But that goes away. But we'll talk.
It does. So this movie, it's meta in a really bizarre way. It's meta in the way that The Muppets is meta.
Yeah, I like
it's
that.
like the idea that this character exists and she's putting on a show for you, but so Elvira exists, but Cassandra Peterson does not exist.
Right, Cassandra Peterson is not even credited. In both the opening and the closing credits, we only see Elvira credited.
Yeah, so we pick up with Elvira filming her, Elvira's movie Macabre, or a version of that, and being kind of sick of her job. She quits after one of many gross men in this movie tries to sexually assault her. Mm-hmm. And she dreams of being a Vegas showgirl, but she has to put up some of the money to do so. Her great aunt, Morgana Talbot, has passed away, so she is going to the tiny town of Falwell, Massachusetts, to see if she can, collect on some will money and pay her way to Vegas. Essentially, is the impetus of this plot.
That is our first act. Yes.
Yes, and eventually she finds out she inherits a house, she inherits a dog, and she inherits a recipe book. While she's fixing up the house to try and sell it and potentially get the money that way, she discovers that the recipe book is actually a spell book and the dog is actually a familiar, although these things come into play way, way, way close to the ending. It's mostly just her shocking small-town people for a long time.
Pretty much. The first hour, almost on the dot. I didn't actually check the time when I realized we had shifted, but I checked not that long before that because I had used the bathroom and it was 53 minutes. So pretty close to an hour out of a 96-minute film is just what happens if a woman with a very bawdy sense of humor and just crazy tight black dresses with a very plunging neckline and sort of like this intense drag queen level of makeup. What happens when she goes to a little buttoned up, super conservative Massachusetts town and basically just for the hell of it decides to shock and offend every one of the like tedious moral scolds that cross her path, which is pretty much everyone in town,
including Chastity Parrish, played by Edie McClurg,
which is a wonderful, wonderful character name for a wonderful, wonderful character actress.
Absolutely, it's so special. As far,
and I also love that like McClurg among them, like she's one of the better known faces in this film.
Yeah, she gets
like,
the with credit, I think.
She gets the with credit. A ton of the people in this film were just Peterson like grabbing some of her friends from the groundlings and being like, "Hey, I'm going to be in a movie. Do you want to be in a movie?" Like, that's good.
Yeah, and it's
like
got
that.
it's got a good kind of tight knit vibe to that small town because of that too.
Mm-hmm.
And I recognize one other person. There's a kid named Bo who's played by Ira Hayden, who is the wizard guy Will in Nightmare on Elm Street 3: The Dream Warriors.
Oh, okay. I would not have picked that up. It's been ages since I've seen it.
Yeah. No, yeah, he's the kid that's in a wheelchair, and in his dreams he's a shitty wizard.
Okay. Apparently, Brad Pitt read for one of the high school students, and everyone thought he was super talented and wanted him, and she basically said, it would not be believable if I go for the middle-aged guy if this hot kid is just, like, hanging out looking at my tits.
Yeah.
So.
And apparently she wrote "yum yum" on his headshot.
I'm in.
I mean,
Yes.
yeah. God, 1987 Brad Pitt. That's a moment.
Yep.
But yeah, so the middle-aged guy that she's going after is named Bob. He's played by Daniel Green. He owns the local theater where she does mount an Elvira-style show. Bob is a curious character. Are we meant to understand that he is fully a closeted gay person, or is he just really weird about sex?
I think he's just really weird about sex. I think that's part of the gag. Although also that he seems to be a huge fan of Elvira would argue in favor of him possibly being deeply closeted.
Wait, a huge fan of who?
He ends up being a fan of her, like, burlesque routine, and I feel like Elvira is certainly a gay-friendly entertainer.
I would certainly say so. Yeah.
I think that is the mildest way we could phrase that.
Yeah, and also a queer woman herself, as she revealed in her memoir.
Yes.
Which is super cool. But yeah, she just seems like such an effortlessly interesting person.
Exactly.
Anyway, so the movie here is not presenting us with Cassandra Peterson. It's presenting us with Elvira as a human figure who wants to do Elvira things and be Elvira all the time, essentially.
Exactly.
And the first hour of the movie, I think it is, from what I've learned from when we discussed Young Frankenstein, it's a little more in tune with the sense of humor that you're already bringing to a movie. Is that a good analysis of your kind of style of humor, at least the way that she performs?
Yes, there's a very big sort of vaudevillian-y, burlesque-y way that she sort of approaches this material. I texted my friend, who's the biggest Marx Brothers fan I know, to basically say she's kind of doing like a Groucho Marx if Groucho Marx just had just gigantic cans. And that's fascinating to me that, like, in 1988 someone's willing to go that far back to that kind of like shticky, big line readings, sort of big googly-eyed reaction shot type performance, which tickled me enormously. But I definitely saw some Groucho in there. I actually saw some, like, young Barbra Streisand and sort of the way she prattled. Like, she's a very good prattler. Like, she just kind of reels off these lines of dialogue where you can kind of tell she's talking so fast. I think we're meant to understand she's talking so fast because she's trying to think while she's working her way through these large thickets of words, which I thought she was very good at. Really just tremendous comic timing, I thought. Really letting these kind of big, corny beats hit.
Yes, and I do completely agree with that. I would say that style of comedy is not one that I come to naturally, as far as enjoying, but I tend to, when it comes to this kind of big, broad comedy style, I tend to trust myself when I'm in the hands of a female performer a lot more than when I'm in the hands of a male performer. And that's just an internal bias that I have that I don't know if I could properly explain. But the things that she's doing, like they're so big, like to the point of I think this is a fantasy sequence. Yeah, it's the one where she imagines kind of a game show host presenting her with the will,
Right.
but she's dressed in this enormous black veil and blowing her nose, but she crosses her eyes while she blows her nose. And I think, you know what? I think I've cracked it, because what she's doing is bringing that vaudeville styling, those big cartoonish facial expressions, but she's bringing that to a drag milieu, because Elvira is a drag queen. That is what Elvira is. And so it's kind of a putting that vaudeville technique into even more of a camp space, and that's where I can access it a little more.
Okay, that's interesting. That makes sense. I'm curious if you've ever seen Gypsy.
I have seen Gypsy.
The show or the terrible 1962 movie?
I've seen the terrible 1962 movie.
Okay, well that is not a way to have encountered Gypsy that would allow me to really ask the next question I have. But I wonder if that sort of triggers the same thing for you.
Like, okay, wait, what part of Gypsy? Just the Mama Rose of it all?
It combines a sort of like campiness with vaudeville. Like Mama Rose is a very campy character, I think.
Yeah, well, you know what? Actually, you're right. Mama Rose as a character is very similar to Elvira in that you can see her calculating and just... She isn't always the smartest person in the room, but she usually is, and she knows how to fake it when she isn't.
Exactly, yeah.
No, I really liked that performance, and I like that character. So yeah, totally. That's something that I can totally vibe.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I actually dislike that performance, but I'm glad that it worked as a comparison point for you.
Yeah, I mean, I at least like the performance, the acting part, and not, I don't know about the musical part. It's fine.
Yeah. One of these days I'm going to review Gypsy, but this is not a review of Gypsy. We're talking about Elvira, so I should probably not have gotten us down that sidetrack, but it struck me.
I'm happy to keep talking about Gypsy. There were a lot of frustrating things in that movie, but I enjoyed more than I didn't, I think.
That's good.
Anyway, yeah, Elvira. Yeah. So, and Elvira, it's this kind of warped funhouse mirror vision of sexuality, of female sensual eroticism. And what I find really interesting is that the movie, everything Elvira says is this kind of cornball approach to sex, but it is an extremely chaste movie. In spite of that. Like, no one is actually having sex or, like, really acting on it. Except, again, there's a string of men who are so compelled by her having her boobs out to try and attack her that she then gets the better of. But other than that, I mean, obviously Elvira is a character that came from TV, so she's always kind of, like, walking that dotted line of how far can I go without, like, upsetting the FCC. And this movie's kind of continuing that. Like, she feels very much like when you have, like, a bad influence character in a children's show or a family show, where it's like, what is the exact level of taboo they can touch without actually making parents mad?
Right.
Do you think that's something that should have been happening in a full-length movie about Elvira, or do you think... how do you feel about that?
I mean, it amused me.
Yeah.
I was into it while the movie was doing it. So, and I think that's who the character is. And I think, again, it is this kind of burlesque thing. And I'm by no stretch of the imagination am I a historian of drag, but I feel like there are certainly drag and burlesque go hand in hand in a way. And I think they derive from each other. And then there's the added question of a woman playing a drag character. But I do think there's this sense where the tradition she's coming from is much more of a, like, sort of wink wink nudge nudge tradition, and I think it would be untrue to her performance of this character to not have done this.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. Because part of it was just like, I felt like it was being held back by just kind of that combination of gaudiness and restraint that the Reagan era was kind of defined by, and thinking about it that way, it was kind of annoying. But then if you reposition it in the sense of what she's doing is very vaudeville, it is very 30s, like, that is more honest.
Yeah, I guess to me, I don't know that if Elvira had just been, like, dropping F-bombs left and right, would I have liked this movie more? And I don't think the answer is yes.
Yeah, and also, I think... Sorry,
Plus, the movie does get one quasi F-bomb, and it's good. It amused me deeply.
Yeah. No, and I didn't bring this up as a complaint, and actually, again, this is a thing where I'm kind of discovering my feelings about it as we discuss it.
Sure.
But no, I think seeing Elvira have sex would pop the balloon of what she's doing. Because it's all about coming up right to the edge and not actually...
And I think we're meant to understand that she and Bob have sex in the attic at one point. Because, like, she pulls him over her, and then there's a fade to black. And we all know what fades to black means. But yeah, it's like... She's such a caricature of sexuality that it feels like she couldn't have actual sex and still be Elvira.
Yeah, and there's something about... Because once you are at the point of having sex, there is a veil of eroticism that is drawn back.
Yes.
Because it is no longer the kind of titillation or temptation. It is just sex, which is a very nice thing. But there's a certain part of the kind of foreplay or anticipation that is obviously lost by the act of sex, and she is all about that first thing.
Exactly. And I feel like you can't... If your whole thing is, like, innuendo and jokes, sex isn't... I don't want to say sex isn't funny. It can be. But it's not the kind of comedy this film is playing at, where it's again, all sort of very much about this, like, the joy of coming up with the innuendo.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. No, I'm fully down. I really, really like spending time with Elvira in this movie.
Yes, she is a delightful presence.
Yeah, this was a wonderful kind of entree into the thing that she is. Because especially if you're watching Elvira's movie Macabre, you're mostly just watching a movie. It's not... Like, this is maybe the first full dose of Elvira anyone got? I'd have to re-look at her history.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say that she didn't do, like, live shows in the LA area, but certainly at a national level, I think this is by far the most concentrated dose of Elvira that has been put out into the world.
Yeah, like the thing that actually positions her as a lead rather than, showing you perhaps a movie like It Conquered the World, which is the Roger Corman movie that clips from this movie. I really enjoyed that movie. I think that was a good pick.
It's a good movie. It's a good pick. Speaking of Corman, this was apparently the last film released by New World Pictures. Apparently they went bankrupt the day before this film was meant to come out.
Oh my goodness. Oh yeah, I remember reading about that because they had to reduce its release to a really tiny release that kind of fucked it over.
Yeah, it kind of fucked it over. And I mean, I think that's one of those easy outs where the filmmakers can be like, yeah, we got cut down to 500 theaters, that's why we flopped. I don't think this movie would have been a hit. Like, this is a weird little movie that I think has a fairly small natural audience, and probably smaller in the 1980s than now.
Yeah, because Elvira as a cultural presence has grown so much to be this kind of fixture. But at the time, she was only 2 years away from her show, which presumably was canceled for a reason.
I think it was actually canceled because she wanted to move
okay.
on. I'm not sure about that.
Okay, I don't know. Like I said, my context for Elvira is some brief research before this podcast and this movie.
Fair enough.
I am sorry.
I more meant the sort of big knowing camp of it. The 80s were a decade where there was a sort of ambient level of kitsch and camp, but I think people actually going out and doing it on purpose graded against the nature of 80s pop culture in a way that I think large audiences would not have known what to do.
No, I think you're right, because, yeah, the 80s were ridiculous, but partially because of how earnest everybody making the ridiculous stuff was about it.
Exactly.
Yeah, and, yeah, there's nothing about Cassandra Peterson's performance that is earnest in any way. It is all, like, turning everything up to 11.
Yeah, it's sincere. She's committed to it. She loves doing it, but it's not earnest.
No, she's making fun of everything. She's making fun of these people. She's making fun of herself. Yeah, like there are parts that, because generally Elvira is in control of whatever situation she's in, but there are jokes at her expense too, where she's like mispronouncing words or doesn't understand certain things about the world, but she's just got so much bluster that people still kind of kowtow to her anyway.
Yeah, it's like you were saying, if she's not the smartest person in the world, she knows how to talk fast enough to fake it.
Yes, absolutely. Anyway, what else? I mean, I guess we got to talk about the boring third act of this movie.
We should talk about the boring third act of this movie. So it becomes this, like, witch thriller, basically, where the town folk... She gets her revenge on all the assholes in town by creating a magic stew that she intends to be some sort of, like, flesh-eating monster that doesn't go right. It does make everybody super, super horny. And so at the town picnic, all of these uptight prudes just start, like, grinding on each other. And that wears off, and they all immediately figure out what's going on, and it turns out there's still an anti-witchcraft law in the books. And so she's tied to a stake, and the stake is set on fire. And then she is rescued at the end. She rescues herself. She, like, creates a magic storm with her witch ring. But then her nefarious uncle, who has been spending this whole time trying to steal the spell book to become a warlock, becomes some sort of, like, falling apart cadaverous figure or demon. And so she has to square off with him. And it is a very harsh change from the let's just hang out and listen to this lady with big boobs making bawdy one-liners.
Very, very much. I think the movie could have excelled if it brought in that magic and had it just exist in a kind of Bewitched or Sabrina the Teenage Witch space where she's just, like, doing fun spells.
Bewitched is exactly what I thought it was going to be, because it's clear, like, so early that, like, grandma's or great aunt Morgana's recipe book, well, obviously it's a spell book. Like, that's just kind of...
Yeah, I mean...
Even before it's made clear.
The second they speak her name, you're like, yeah, she's a witch.
Exactly. And I sort of assumed that's where they were going to take it. But no, they make it a full-on... Again, like, it has the structure of a thriller, but never the tone of a thriller, because Elvira herself is still cracking one-liners, even when she's, like, tied up to a stake and there's a fire licking at her heels. She's still, like, spitting out these corny vaudeville one-liners.
Yeah, and the crowd with torches and pitchforks is chanting 2468, who do we incinerate? Which is a solid line.
It was a good line. It's a good line.
But it doesn't match the kind of, like, Steve Miner's warlock of it all, of the third act. It's just... It's silly in that 80s way that's not matching everything else that the movie's doing. I would say the effect that makes him look demonic in the end, I think, is not... The makeup's not that bad.
No, it's not that bad. That's the thing. It's if the thing you're going for is a slightly more horrifying than it has been horror comedy with, like, good makeup and good enough effects and, like, witchery, it's not a terrible version of that thing. That's just a strange thing for the movie to suddenly become.
Yes, and it really doesn't fit what it's doing, and it really sucks out the energy, because, like you said, she is still quipping, but it's kind of at a minimum when she's actually just, you know, having a laser beam fight. It turns into a weird Star Wars battle briefly. Or, you know, fantasy, just light show, whatever. I will say I think the moment that it most gets to that kind of bewitched place that it could have been is when she makes the casserole and it turns into a big puppet monster. And I think that puppet's pretty good.
That's a good puppet. It's a very, very good puppet. I wasn't... in the moment that scene was happening, I could sort of feel the ground shifting below me in a way that I did not love. The scene worked, but I would have preferred if that had been the closest the film actually came to horror. Was that scene.
I completely agree. I think the puppet is much better than it has any right to be, because there's a part...
Oh, God, yes.
They're fighting with the puppet, they dump it in the sink, and there's this part where they throw the puppet into the sink, and then its head kind of bends back and its tail bends back at the same time, so you can kind of see, quote unquote, the whole creature, and it's a really kind of marvelous little bit of puppetry in camera effects. But yeah, it just gets really messy and boring, and then it closes out in a space that the first part of the movie was kind of leading towards. Is like, she gets her Las Vegas show and she's performing this song, but I gotta say, this song really didn't click with me.
I read about it afterwards. Apparently the studio did not want to pony up for the actual Vegas show, and Peterson and her then husband, who was the producer, like really leaned on them to like say, no, this is how the movie has to end. And it's not an interesting scene.
No, and she does some really horrible 80s white lady rap.
It is a good reminder of where white people rap was circa 1988. I always forget. And then you have a face-to-face encounter with it, and it's like, this is horrible.
Yeah, it is really grim. And look, I am a purveyor of shitty songs from 80s movies. I have a whole playlist of them. Like I own the shitty rock song that opens Jason Takes Manhattan, or Prom Night, Everything Is Alright, that Jamie Lee Curtis dances to. But this song, it doesn't light the fire in my soul that I would assume that an Elvira song could and should have.
It's not theatrical.
No, it's not.
It doesn't have like that sort of Broadway style bombast, which is what I was expecting.
Yeah, it's too thin. I mean, a lot of them, just generally the music in Elvira, Mistress of the Dark is pretty thin. It's this kind of weak little kind of MIDI electronic trilling that's just not really doing anything.
Yeah. It's very cheap 80s quasi-horror movie. It sort of washed off me. I didn't even really notice it for the most part. But, yeah, in this scene, it does really stand out. It's just like, this is nothing. This is not, it doesn't have the sort of, it doesn't back up that drag burlesque thing that the movie has been trafficking in.
Yeah, it's really disappointing, because Cassandra Peterson doesn't have a bad voice either. It's just nothing. It's not, yeah, like, just that part of the filmmaking process is just not delivering. But anyway, aesthetically, this movie I don't think is necessarily that interesting either, but there are certain key shots that I really love. Like, I love Elvira lying on her bed with her hair kind of spread out behind her in this kind of cloak-esque shot.
Yeah, that's good. Generally, when they're like leaning into, let's do some horror iconography, it always goes well. Maybe not always, but most of the time it goes well. Because she is sort of a vampire character. Like, that's where the visual design comes from. And they play with that a little bit. They give her these kind of gothic moments. There's a repeated shot. It's an effect shot of clouds crossing the moon that I kind of liked. It doesn't look terribly real, but it looks fake in a way that kind of gives me, like, Universal in the 40s vibes.
There's a thing, like, your effects don't have to look real as long as they look right.
Exactly.
And generally, I don't know, I wouldn't say this is a particularly visually inspired movie, but generally it looks right most of the time.
It looks fine. It is not a movie that lives and dies off having really impressive atmospheric visuals. Everything's in focus, everything's lit well without seeming overlit. The camera is generally in a place where it needs to be to get the characters need to be in shot well. It's very functional, but it functions. Mm-hmm. One thing I did read, apparently, because Tim Burton's previous film, Pee-wee's Big Adventure, had been filmed with a friend of Peterson's, a member of the Groundlings, Paul Rubens. Apparently there was some talk about getting him in to direct this movie, and he ended up working on Beetlejuice instead, which came out at the same time. But it did get me wondering, what would this have looked like as a Burton film? And I'm not saying it would have been a good Burton film, because I don't think he would have even remotely understood what was going on with the humor. Mm-hmm. But I think it would have been certainly an interesting thought experiment.
Yeah, I think he would have gotten that look down in a much more interesting way. I mean, this movie was directed by James Signorelli, who is a frequent director for SNL, and that's how he directs this movie. Like, it is comedy forward. It's the look isn't really there. I mean, if anything, the movie doesn't necessarily even demand a kind of gothic or macabre look, because for most of it, it is kind of just a goth version of Tu Wong Fu.
Honestly,
yeah, just a non-typical person arriving in a small town. So there aren't a lot of visual demands on it, and it's probably best that he just let Cassandra Peterson shine and do her thing. But that does seem like such a huge missed opportunity.
It does, but at the same time, like if Tim Burton had done this, or someone with a Tim Burton-esque sensibility, would the comedy? I think too much atmosphere would kill the comedy. Too much trying to like lean into that macabre goth feeling, unless you're very much doing that as part of the joke.
Mm-hmm.
I think that just would have smothered the comedy.
You're probably right, because nothing about Elvira is scary. And that's never been something she was actively trying to do.
Right. And like this is a character designed to thrive in, like, put a cardboard coffin and some dry ice in a local news studio. I mean, yeah, there's like a degree to which that's like trafficking in horror iconography, but it's going to be lit with the same like flat surface lighting that you use to light your three anchors sitting at a desk. Like, it's not ever supposed to be moody.
Yeah.
And I think the character feels like that. Like, a moody Elvira film would be weird. And who's to say that the second one didn't go there? And I actually do plan on watching Elvira's Haunted Hills, because this was a success for me, so I want to see more of her. But I don't know. I think that as easy as it is to want the filmmakers to have gone further in making like Aunt Morgana's house sort of weird and creepy and gothic, I think that there's a fragility to the comedy that may or may not have survived that.
I suppose so. You're right. It's transposing the very limited scope of how it started into this much broader world. There are some complications there, and I think they probably made the choice to prioritize the things that were most important about the Elvira character. Like, I would say the decision, like the over the top decisions they do make are the right ones. Like, when we get to see what Elvira looks like as a baby.
That's a great visual.
It is.
That's such a good
Such a good visual. It's so good. And that is the space that the comedy that the film thrives in the most, is that kind of just letting Elvira breathe and be the thing that she is.
Although I will say, you remind me of the baby flashbacks, and now I do wonder if I need to scale back what I was saying, because those flashbacks are done in a sort of mock gothic style, like dark set, but like strong key lighting. There's fog. There's like these sort of creepy looking-ish buildings pointed like from a low angle, the Pick and Save orphanage, which was a visual gag that I liked much more than I should have. So that does work in that like sort of horror parody vibe, and maybe they could have gone further with it. I don't know.
Yeah, but the thing that's complicated is that it is about the juxtaposition of her being that horror thing in this extremely bland world. So that is complicated. I mean, her house definitely could have been more beefed up as far as the gothic grandeur. Yeah, because it could have been more of an Addams Family or the Munsters kind of thing, where it's like, this house is the fucking wild house of monsters and everyone else is kind of normal people.
I did find myself multiple times thinking during the film, would I have liked this more or less if it had been sort of more explicitly in the same vein as the 93 and 95 Addams Family movies.
Yeah, I think...
Or 91 and 93, rather.
Yeah, I think there's room for that. Yeah, we'll just have to see. There's a lot of Elvira stuff out there, and this is the first glimpse into it. So I don't know whether this is good Elvira or bad Elvira, and like what the tone is otherwise. I mean, obviously, as far as the character goes, it is good Elvira. And she sells these very minor lines too. Like, I like when she's trying to read the recipe book, and it's written in this kind of runic language, and she's like, two Edrazibas. She's like, now where did Aunt Morgana keep the Edraziba? Like, just this kind of mundanity of these wild things. Like, that's where it works. But, yeah, just not in the look. It's more in her performance.
No, for sure. And I think her performance is quite good. And, again, I've been comparing it throughout to vaudeville, so I don't want to keep doing that. But, like, it is that thing. It is that thing of, like, just kind of muscling through in this big, burly, like, personality forward way. And she has tons and tons of personality. So I think it all works out.
Yeah. I think Elvira is a character that's elastic enough that hopefully she was able to exist in a lot of different spaces and additional tones on top of comedy, because Elvira is always going to be a comic figure. It doesn't make sense to have her do other things, but there are other tones that they could have blended it with that this movie doesn't. And sure. I think ultimately the limitations of this movie are why we both landed on 3 stars rather than anything higher, in spite of really liking Elvira.
Yeah, no, because, like, again, I was going to go higher than 3 stars, but that third act just murders its momentum. It just really, it's a huge bummer, that third act.
Yeah, it's really disappointing, and it's tough to end on a slog like that. It really kind of deflates the energy of the movie.
It for sure does. And then they kind of compound it by ending not really on the plot, but on the Vegas sequence that I think we both sort of checked out from.
Yeah, it's just, it kind of makes me mad. It should have been so much more than it was.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm glad to hear you want to keep going with Elvira, because I certainly do. I downloaded the audiobook of Yours Cruelly, Elvira, which is Cassandra Peterson's memoir. Okay. And if I have the opportunity to read it before we record again, I'll do a little book report. But I'm very curious about her and about that now.
Definitely would love to hear that report.
Yeah, is there anything else to say about the movie?
I wanted to throw, just as a kind of, because, we talked about it as, it's, very funny, but not specifics. We didn't talk about, like, what are the gags we really admire. So I just wanted to ask, what's your favorite gag? What's your least favorite gag?
Whew, okay. Well, definitely among the favorite gags, like Baby Elvira's great. The Edraziba line. I like the Tic Tac pie that one of the ladies makes. That's a really good...
that was a really good... McClurg's reaction to that was superb. That's why I love her.
Yeah, and Eden McClurg, that's a great role. We haven't talked enough about that. For least favorite, you give me one of yours and I'll think about it.
So early on in the film, I think it started out a little rocky, honestly, because it starts out with, like, this... She doesn't realize she's on camera, so she's going off on this weird little tangent about how shitty her job in the movie were. But she's on camera the whole time, which is never, like, a super clever thing to do, and I also think it gets weirdly underplayed. So that kind of bummed me out. And then
I actually read that differently. I thought that was she knew they had cut somewhere, and so she was going off on the movie during the time that she wasn't on air, and then she switched back to being Elvira when the camera was back on her.
Oh, I got the impression that the thing was that she was still on the air, because they were, like, frantically gesturing.
I'm unsure about it. That was at least
which certainly speaks to the moment having not.
Yeah, it is. If anything, a poorly blocked sequence. It doesn't make any sense.
But there's also there's this odd sequence where she's driving to Massachusetts from California, and the sequence is, I think, sort of. It's not certainly the best part of the movie because it's a kind of montage, and there's not really a lot of room for her to do the line deliveries that are really where her performance lives. So I didn't love any of that montage. And again, this is how the film begins. So for the first, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, I was not feeling it. And then I sort of got on its wavelength. But there's a moment where she's, shoving a hot dog in her mouth. Oh. And the hot dog falls out and lands in her cleavage. And it cuts to this, mustardy hot dog lying in her boobs. And it's the most weirdly horrible image.
Yeah.
That I get that it's meant to be haha, it looks like a dick, it looks like somebody's titty fucking her, but it's also ugly and gross and not funny.
Yeah, and it's prurient in a way that the rest of the movie isn't, because the movie is very much about how she has big boobs, but it's in a way that's very fun. And
like the gag where she's cleaning her car's windshield and her boobs are like making a squeaking noise as they're rubbing against the windshield. That to me is a good boob joke.
yes. Yeah, it's just, because the hot dog thing, it's not really a joke. It's not accomplishing anything.
Right. It's a weirdly clippable, like, because it's not even like in continuity. We don't later see, like, because what immediately happens thereafter is she pulls up next to an Amish couple, and I assume there's going to be some sort of weird hot dog payoff with the Amish couple leering at her, and it's gone. The hot dog is gone at that point.
Yeah, which does make it feel like it was a late addition as well.
Right.
It's not organic, and it's just kind of gross. And I guess my least favorite gags are the ones about just the, like I've been saying, there's a string of attempted sexual assaults upon Elvira, and you never get the sense that she's actively in danger because she's Elvira, but it's this constant reminder that, like, it's this kind of poisonous extension of the thing of, like, yes, everyone's ogling Elvira because Elvira's hot, and that is the thing that Elvira wants to happen. But then it just takes that joke too far, because I feel like with the super light tone of this movie having so many of these scenes, it's really just kind of depressing.
Yeah, no, it is a weird runner.
Yeah.
If it was just at the start, it would be like, oh, well, that was a kind of clunky moment in part of the overall clunky exposition of the film. That it becomes like an actual thing really threw me.
Yeah, it's really bizarre, and it's not like, because I think there's a way to do it that, while it would still be controversial today, like, would have been more bearable. Like, there would have been a Pepe Le Pew kind of way to do it, where it's more like a lovesick thing, and it's less physical and less violent. And I probably still wouldn't have liked it as much, but it would fit the tone of the movie a lot better.
Agreed.
But yeah, so that's my low point.
And I realized I didn't actually share my high point. And I had a couple. I like the big, sort of fearlessly punny line delivery and the, like, willingness just to, like, lean into corny one-liners. So most of my favorites were just, like, based on line delivery. But a couple that I really did particularly enjoy. There's one, and it's the most blatantly obvious joke possible. She hits her head.
Yep, I was thinking about that one.
Yep, and Bob says, "How's your head?" And she responds, "I haven't had any complaints." And it's like, it's good. It's talking about blood jokes.
And well, that is squarely in your sense of humor too.
That is micro targeted to the way that I like my jokes. So that worked for me. And there's also, again, it's really obvious. It's like, it's not even slightly trying to be clever. But Bob's movie theater, because of the town's, like, moral codes, he can only show G-rated movies. And she says, "Oh, I love G-rated movies as long as they have plenty of sex and violence."
That is a good line too, yeah.
It's a good line. And then also she goes on this, like, big monologue where she's trying to, like, convince the teens of the town who have been sort of forced to turn against her by the school principal. And she's like, she has this big, like, tearful, like, banging herself against a desk monologue where she, like, can't believe that even these only people in town who were nice to her would have finally turned away from her. And will they remember her when she's gone and wasted away into nothingness? And I forget exactly how it's phrased, but it's something like, I hope they say just 2 simple words about me. I don't care which 2 as long as they're simple.
Yeah.
And that one's 100% on her line delivery, I think.
Yeah. And no, that sequence is really good too. That is her biggest, like, Mama Rose sequence, because she is fully scamming these people.
Oh, exactly.
And it's fun to watch her getting the better of people. That's such a fun. That's such a fun Elvira thing for her to do.
No, and this is again where I think of something like Groucho Marx type, is like she's basically just a flim-flammer and she's good at it.
Yeah, exactly. Like I always think of the Music Man, like of the just like fast talking con artist nonsense.
Yeah, I can see that same vibe.
But yeah, so yeah, Elvira maybe deserved a slightly more interesting vehicle, but like giving her one was for sure the right choice.
Yes, 100%.
But yeah, is that it? Do we have anything else? My notes are tapped.
I don't really have anything else. I didn't get to use nearly as many euphemisms for the female bosom as I thought I might. I had a list of words ready to go, but you know, I don't feel sad I wasn't able to get to more than a couple.
Yeah, well, Elvira really covered the gamut on that.
She sure did. We heard gazongas. We heard a couple others. I can't remember.
Yeah, I don't remember either. Alas.
But yeah, no, good, lot of good boob jokes.
Absolutely,
many good boob jokes.
Like A+ to Elvira as a character, as just a thing, as an I don't want to. Never mind. Just as a person, I love her.
I mean, character is good, performance is good, the shtick is good. It's good shtick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I can't wait to see more of the thing that she does. But
Yes.
Alas,
I also can't wait to see more of her things.
Mm-hmm. Oh, we did it. We got there.
I got there.
Anyway, this is the end of Horror Comedy Month. We actually have not discussed what we're doing next yet, but if you are a member of the Patreon, keep an eye out. I will be running the poll for the first movie we watch in July very, very shortly, and, you know, we'll find out together what the hell we're watching.
Huzzah.
Huzzah. And yeah, thank you so much for listening. You can find more of Tim's reviews and mine, both in podcast form and written form, at alternateending.com. You can also follow Alternate Ending on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. We're doing all kinds of social media things. You can follow me on Twitter at It's Raining Brens. And
you can follow me on Twitter at Tim Brayton, but you'll be super disappointed if you do.
You will be super disappointed. He's not even doing Moby Dick anymore.
No, I haven't been for some years.
I know,
sadly.
very sad. Yeah, I try to tag, because I run the alternating Twitter a lot of the time, and I try to tag whoever is, you know, writing the article or whatever, but I've never tagged you, Tim, because I know it would be useless for both you and the people reading.
It would just end in tears.
It absolutely would. But yes, thank you so much for listening. I think there's still a couple slots open at the Oscar level of the Patreon if you want to decide a topic we cover for the month, so look into that. And, you know, have a great day, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
She hates